my friend, Dr. Tony Hampton, for inviting me. And for that really, you really laid it up in terms of, you see in your practice people with serious chronic so-called physical conditions of the body
That's right.
that we were taught in medical school were not reversible, that you could only treat these with medications. And the same was true for me, in psychiatry training, that I was taught that most mental health conditions are chronic and kind of mysterious and incurable. And we just kind of have to hang in there with people and try different medicines one at a time and hope for the best.
Right.
And meanwhile, most of our patients aren't getting that much better. And
Yeah.
so it's wonderful. Some of the very same tools that you find powerful in your work
That's right.
are the ones that I'm finding powerful in my work.
Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. We are only scratching the surface of the importance of our diet and its impact on, how well our bodies can actually function, how well we can digest food, how effective we can be at sleep, and even how well we can focus. Now, in my clinical practice, I've seen patients with type 2 diabetes literally reverse that condition and put it into remission by simply making dietary changes. I've even seen people do the same for their blood pressure, conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome, and a long list of others that I would have to spend multiple podcasts celebrating just by simply reducing their carbohydrate consumption. But one of the areas that has the most promise is the area of the mind, and so many medical conditions that are related to mental health. And they're so challenging to treat. So it's really promising to know that there may be a better way to treat it than by simply relying on medicine. So today, I've invited a previous guest and, of course, a good friend back to the podcast to talk about her new book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, because I think it's so important that we continue to spread the healing message that, yes, you can heal your brain if simply by making dietary changes. So with that, today's guest is Dr. Georgia Ede, and she is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, and she specializes in nutrition and metabolic psychiatry, which is quite unusual. She's had 25 years of experience, including 12 years at Smith College and Harvard University Health Sciences, where she was the first to introduce nutrition-based therapies as an alternative to psychiatric medications. What I appreciate about her is that she has not been afraid to, challenge conventional thinking. And when challenged and it was suggested that she shouldn't focus on nutrition, she decided to do the right thing, which was to literally move forward with that approach. And it's really life-changing because so many people, including my own family, have had areas of struggle, in particular dementia. And so the work she's doing is so important. I'm so happy she's become a good friend. And also, we have similar dietary patterns in that we love to eat meat. So thank you, Doc, for coming to this episode of the podcast. And thank you so much.
That's such a nice introduction. Thank you very much, my friend, Dr. Tony Hampton, for inviting me. And for that really, you really laid it up in terms of, you see in your practice people with serious chronic so-called physical conditions of the body.
That's right.
That we were taught in medical school were not reversible, that you could only treat these with medications. And the same was true for me, in psychiatry training, that I was taught that most mental health conditions are chronic and kind of mysterious and incurable. And we just kind of have to hang in there with people and try different medicines one at a time and hope for the best.
Right.
And meanwhile, most of our patients aren't getting that much better.
Yeah.
And so it's wonderful. Some of the very same tools that you find powerful in your work
That's right.
are the ones that I'm finding powerful in my work. And this is because the principles actually work.
Yeah.
And actually, if you eat right, and most of us are fed the wrong information about how to eat. If you eat right, you can expect more of your body and your mind and your spirit than you ever thought possible.
And for anybody who hasn't had the pleasure of hearing you on another podcast or just, learned about your book or, first of all, you did spend some time with me on a previous episode, so I'll make sure to have the link to that episode. It's actually one of my favorite podcasts ever. I just really enjoyed our conversation. But more importantly, uh, if you know someone that has a mental health condition, whether it's, dementia, autism, ADHD, bipolar, schizophrenia, and the list goes on, this is an episode in my mind that helps to restore hope. So please, this is not the episode you kind of click through. This is an episode you hear the information, you get the concepts in your mind. And some people who are hearing this have heard, they understand carb restriction helps. But for those who have never heard that, it's a game changer. And I've seen miracles happen, and it's so like surreal that it's possible. So let's kind of start just by understanding what led a conventionally trained psychiatrist to understand that nutrition actually matters. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we 4 years of medical school, we had maybe 2 or 3 hours of nutrition education, and most of what we were taught was not correct. And then 4 years of psychiatry residency training, we didn't talk about food and the brain once. And not even when we were talking about eating disorders, which you would think would be a little bit about food.
You would think.
So, and, so it never crossed my mind. And, I and many of the women in my family grew up with a weight problem. I grew up in the 70s. That was back when being overweight as a kid was pretty rare. So, I was one of only 2 kids in my class who were overweight. And it really was, very, very, challenging emotionally. It was tough. Now it's pretty common, unfortunately, for kids to be overweight, but that wasn't true back then. So anyway, the reason I wanted to mention that is because going through college and medical school and residency and all those years of special training that I was so fortunate to have, I only thought about food choices as a way to control my weight. That was it. I didn't understand anything more about it than that. And I also didn't do a very good job of it. So it was hard. It was exercising and counting calories and all of that. I didn't understand how much it matters to your brain, how much your brain and your whole body care about not just how much you weigh, but they care about what you eat because they're counting on you to provide those nutrients, those molecules, those parts, the right types of parts and the right amount of energy from the right types of fuel molecules so that your body and brain can work at their best. And if you don't feed them right, they're not going to work well for you. And so I didn't become interested in this or even realize that there was something to it until, quite selfishly, was trying to solve one of my own health problems. I developed some annoying, mysterious syndromes, mystery syndromes, things that a lot of my middle-aged patients were struggling with. Just when I was in my 40s, I was middle-aged and starting to not feel well. Fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, IBS, migraines. All my tests were normal. There were really no medicines for these things. So I just started experimenting with my diet and then studying nutrition. And long story short, I discovered that these dietary changes, essentially by flipping my diet upside down in this really strange way, that was the answer. And and it wasn't just my body that felt better. This was the surprise. My mood, my energy, my concentration, everything, my mental health was better, even though I didn't think that bad to begin with. I was like, wait a minute, this diet seems to be good for the brain. So let me learn more about that. And so I studied nutrition for a long time, and long story short, here I am. But I'm really, one of the reasons I wrote this book is that I'm tired of people having to accidentally stumble into this information. And still today, people are having wait a minute, I didn't know that if I changed my diet, I might be able to heal my bipolar disorder. Wait, I didn't know that after 20 years of medications or 30 medications or whatever it is, I've been out of the hospital. I didn't know that I might be able to get rid of my hallucinations by changing my diet. I didn't know that my suicidal thinking might go away. I didn't know I could improve my memory scores on
Hmm.
my Alzheimer's testing. I didn't know.
That's
And
right.
so people need to know.
They need to know. And we kind of, you were being very gracious before we started recording because I told you how crazy my day was, right?
Yeah.
And it was crazy. And although things worked out, it was busy. So, you have a long, busy day and you're trying to, and this is the thing that, so as I think about those comments and how I was able to get through it, number one, I wasn't hungry. So I literally was eating a couple of hamburger patties on my way home to record with you. And it was like, 3:34 or so, whatever. But I wasn't like hungry. I just ate because it was time to eat. Number two, in the evening, and for me, it was 6 o'clock Chicago time, my mental clarity is still there. My energy is still
Mhm,
there. I'm
mhm.
going to spend time, as I told you, after we record with my family. And I'm not like annoyed that my family's visiting my mom and dad. So it's like amazing when you think about the benefits beyond helping somebody with mental health. Like just my regular day-to-day activities are easier. And certainly I need to make sure I manage my time so I do get breaks. But that's really something that's interesting to me. And another thing that's interesting to me on a different subject is this idea of training. And what shocks me is that when for example, a gastroenterologist, a GI doc, right? They should be experts on nutrition because that's where the food goes, right?
Yes.
But yet that is not quite there, and their education on nutrition is as limited as it is for any other doctor. And then I think about my kids and when they were younger, and sometimes even at this age of 24 and 26, they'll be a year older this year, how they behave differently based on what we fed them, right? That should be a very obvious connection. So your thoughts on why the profession of psychiatry has not figured out that nutrition is important. What do you think the reasons for that may be?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think some of them apply to all different branches of medicine. I mean, one is that there's kind of a lack of original thinking. uh, just not a lot of creative thinking. There's a lot of
Mhm.
we're going to memorize all the things that everyone has always been memorizing. We got to make sure we get all those things memorized. And there's just no time to do anything else. You got to memorize your pathways, and you got to memorize your medications and your side effects and the names of different diseases, and how all the nerves and arteries are, how the pathways in the body. I mean, most of medical school is memorization,
Yeah.
and all those chemical pathways. People who out there who remember their biology class will be like, Krebs cycle and things like that. Why did we learn about those things? I didn't understand. I mean, I memorized them, but I didn't understand what they
Yeah.
meant.
Right. Right.
I had no idea what to do with that information.
Right.
So, but anyway, I think so. One is that there's a lot of just traditions that are hard to break
Hmm.
in medical education and all this stuff we've memorized. Another is that most of what we are taught about is how to prescribe, how to choose and prescribe and manage medications and all of their side effects.
Hmm.
That's a big part of medical school, so that takes up a lot of time, and there's money behind that. People make money from that, and then the other thing is that nobody gets rich telling people what not to eat.
Right. That's right.
So, and another piece I think is that, and I'm guilty of this, and I wrote this in the book, is that I thought that I'm going to go to medical school, I'm going to get the best education I can, and I'm going to learn these really special things that other kinds of practitioners don't get to know. I'm going to get to prescribe medications. I'm going to get to do procedures. I'm
Hmm.
going to do all these like fancy, exclusive things. That's what makes a real doctor. That's what
Hmm.
separates doctors from dietitians and nurses and therapists and all these other people who are working hard to take care of people. I'm going to be a doctor, and I'm going to get to do these special things. And I think for a lot of us, including myself, I thought kind of nutrition was kind of beneath me. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to waste my time learning about these things that just anybody can learn. I'm going to do these things that are really, I'm paying all this money for this education. I want to do the special, most important things. But I never understood how special and important and powerful and fascinating and complicated
Mm-hmm.
the nutrition science is, and how incredibly not just powerful as an intervention, but empowering to patients. And we actually heal people this way. You can heal people this way. And it's really interesting. It's not, it's not just, it's worthy. It's worthy of medical,
Mm-hmm.
it's worthy of medical education. We
Yeah.
should be learning these things. They're exciting and and they really work.
Yeah. And as you talked about how exciting it is, and I don't think we're nerds, right? I think who wouldn't want to be interested in understanding how their body works, right? Like how cool that is. But what's scary and what continues to exist is, like you said, I didn't know what to do with that information. We have to change the paradigm. And that's kind of what's cool about metabolic health and understanding what we're sharing is that when you understand biochemistry and can apply it, that's a different animal than just memorizing the citric acid cycle or whatever. It's like, why do I need to know this information? And I just really feel grateful that the low carb community has forced me to become a student again. I have to, and when you wrote your book, you had to become a student again. And when you read a research journal and or a trial, you had to become a student again and understand and connect those dots. So I really am so grateful, and for all those who are checking us out who have not had a metabolically trained doctor in front of them, I just want to apologize for a health system that has not trained us to do that. Instead, our health system has trained us to follow guidelines. Your doctor is intelligent, highly competent, very motivated to help you heal. But we've been trained not to think anymore. We've been trained to follow what we're told to follow and never to question it. And we have to change that paradigm. We should question even what we believe as often as possible. And that's what I love about having people on the other side of the aisle who may have a different approach. And so whenever they challenge us, we honor that and we say, thank you for challenging me. Now let me rethink what I know and let me then consider what you're saying. And then hopefully we can get closer to a more optimal place. So thank you for sharing that. And I do want to think in terms of, I kind of incorporate nutrition into every conversation. Now, I did tell you before we started that I had a patient who had a foot ulcer. Now, I think most clinicians and many people know that if you're going to heal a foot ulcer, you have to eat properly, right? So I always find ways to incorporate nutrition. If you break your leg, we're going to talk about nutrition so you can heal. If you have a headache, we're going to talk about nutrition so you can heal. So when did you start to incorporate this nutrition into your actual psychiatric practice?
I started around 2009 when I was at the Harvard University Health Service, where I was seeing students, faculty, and staff. As I was hired as a psychiatrist to prescribe medications primarily because we had lots of therapists already on staff. So the psychiatrists were hired primarily to prescribe medications. But there was, when I developed this interest in nutrition, there was a very wonderful, open minded director of the service there, a psychiatrist who encouraged those of us who had special interests
Mm-hmm.
to offer those in addition to to medications to those who were interested. And
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of was able to dip my toes into the water and start having those conversations with people about food when they felt, when they were interested. And they gradually grew from there. I mean, eventually, uh, I became much more knowledgeable about not just nutrition in general, but metabolism in particular. So, things like how do your blood sugar and insulin levels affect your brain health? How does a ketogenic diet, what are the special properties, the unique brain healing properties uh, of how does a ketogenic diet work? It has these unique brain healing properties that are now the corner. That's why they're now the cornerstone of my medical practice. But it took some years to get there,
Hmm.
to learn more about it, and then to gradually use those diets as well in my practice. So it's now all of what I do, everything that I do now, is about nutrition and metabolism. I still use my psychotherapy skills every day because changing diet is hard.
Yes.
Changing behavior is hard. I
Yes.
know because I had to change my own diet and it was hard. And so we human beings, we don't like to make changes. So I still use all my therapy skills. Every ounce of
Hmm.
my therapy training I use in my work every day. I'm sure you do too.
Absolutely.
Coaching and supporting and
Hmm.
motivating and, just getting curious about people's resistance to change and what do they care about the most and how can you meet them where they're at and
Hmm.
encourage them and be positive. I use all of those skills in my work. And I still use medications in my work, but far less than I used to. Um, I'm now a food first psychiatrist,
Yes.
and and I love practicing this way. The way I was practicing before was it was very, very, very hard work. Um, this is hard work too, but it's so much more rewarding because
Yeah.
you're working in partnership with the other person
Hmm.
to figure out how they how are they going to get to a place where they're going to start to take some ownership of their own mental health.
Yeah.
And it's a fun experience working together in partnership like that.
Yeah, I love that. I think about now, most of your patients are adults, or do you see kids at all?
I only see adults. I don't have child and adolescent training. That's
Okay.
in psychiatry. There's a
Yeah,
very
I'm sure. Yeah, it's
clear
very
line
different.
between those of us who see kids and don't. So I unfortunately no, I don't see kids.
That's okay. Well, I want you to use your imagination for a moment and imagine that you have a fifth grader in front of you, okay? And you have to make, he's never taken biochemistry before, but he heard this term. He heard his parents talking about ketosis, right? So my question for this 5-year old, fifth 5-year old is, okay, I heard this, my parents talking about ketosis, and I heard that it's good for their brains, and I want their brains to be good because I want my mommy and daddy to be happy. So if you were to explain to them how or why ketosis improves mental health, what would you say to that 5-year
What
old or
a
that fifth grader?
That's an amazing question. I love that question. So, I would say that some of the foods that most of us eat too much of. Most of us are eating too much sugar and cereals and juices and sweet and starchy things. Breads and cereals and pastas and things like that. So we're eating a lot of sugar and starch, and that is challenging. It makes it a little harder for the brain to work properly, and we're not eating enough, of the foods that the brain really needs to support itself. So the proteins and the fats, things like meat and eggs and fish and vegetables and nuts and things that aren't so sweet or starchy.
Mhm.
So the reason why, so what ketosis is, it's when you eat a lot less of those sweet and starchy foods and you eat more of the protein and fat foods, so that your body can start to burn more fat for energy. And when your body's burning more fat and less sugar, it breaks that fat down into ketones that can feed the brain. And the ketones circulate around in your bloodstream. They come from the fat that you're eating and they cross into the brain and they feed the brain and make the brain happier.
Nice. I like that. Thank you. And I'm the parent of that kid, and I'm a little bit more sophisticated. So for me, I heard this other term, which is metabolic health. And I wonder if there's a connection between mental health and metabolic health. So if you could just honor me with an explanation as an adult who's just as curious as my child. So what would you say about that?
Am I speaking now to your inner child, Dr. Tony? We're speaking
Yes,
tightly to be precise.
I think you may be. We'll have a session after we're done.
Yes, yes, yes. We may have to have more than one.
That's right. You got that right. Funny, funny.
So yeah, so metabolism and so what is metabolism, and how does that connect to mental health? I mean, one of the ways you could think about it is, you know, having a good metabolism means that all your cells are working at their best. They're working very efficiently and cleanly and smoothly. And the way they're operating is they're operating with as little damage as possible. They're working cleanly, smoothly, and efficiently. And they're making energy in the best, most efficient possible way. So it's like little well-oiled machines that are smoothly humming along, and they're all clean and they're happy.
Mhm.
And they're providing wonderful energy, and they're taking care of the cells that they're making energy for. So everything's good. That's a good metabolism. And when your metabolic health is not good, that means that your cells are struggling. They're not operating at their best. They're when they're making energy, they're kind of the way that they're making energy is they're causing more damage. There's a lot more inflammation. There's a lot more kind of damage that's happening as it's
Mhm.
more it's like a car if you put the wrong fuel inside, and so you get kind of
Yep.
dirty exhaust coming out the back, right? So it's not this nice clean smooth functioning car with clean exhaust coming out the back. You've got this car that's like all rickety and it's making loud noises, and it's kind of sputtering to get down the street, and it's got all this ugly smoke coming out the back. So the way it's making energy is really dirty and unhealthy, and over time is going to cause the car is going to break down. So if you want your cells to be working like a beautifully, like a beautifully oiled, like a car that's working at the top of its game, um, so that's what metabolic health is. So
Yeah.
when your cells are working this nice way, they stay healthy. They work for you. You can count on them, not just today, not just tomorrow, but for your whole life. That your brain cells included. Your memory is going to stay strong. You're going to be able to age well. You're going to be thinking and working productively and still being happy and stable through your whole life. It's not normal for your brain to fall apart as you get older. It's not normal to kind of have your energy run down and sort of feel like, by the time you're 40, you want to retire.
Mhm.
It's not normal to get irritated by little things or to stay upset about something that happened a
Mhm.
long time ago. We should be able to be more resilient and move on. So anyway, if we don't have good metabolic health, then our brain will start to malfunction. And so really it's mostly about getting the right nutrients from your diet, so nourishing your brain with the right foods, and
Mhm.
and protecting your brain from the damaging things in the diet that can damage its metabolism. Things like sugars and flours and cereals and fruit juices and vegetable oils and all the
Yes.
modern
All
processed
those things.
foods. And it's about energizing the brain in this clean, safe, reliable way, which means burning more fat and less sugar, and
Nice.
keeping those blood sugar and insulin levels in a nice healthy range so that you're not putting too much sugary stress on the brain's metabolism.
Wow, my inner child is very happy with that answer, and and better understands how I was able to make it to this recording the way I described earlier, with mental clarity, energy, and was able to manage my day. Because when you're in this place called ketosis, in this place called metabolic health, everything, it's a game changer, and I really I'm so grateful I found that. And I found it, at a reasonable stage in my life when it's so important as a doctor, as a husband, as a father, as a leader to be able to think straight and to focus. So I really appreciate that. So when it comes to, when I think about my patients who have been treated for anxiety, depression, and other health conditions, and particularly those two, one of the things that we learned in our training was it's going to take some time for the medicines to work. Don't expect things to happen too quickly, right? So if somebody's hearing this conversation, they're excited about ketosis, metabolic health, improving their focus, their concentration. give us an idea of how long it takes for us to expect return on investment. When should we expect things to get better?
I think a lot of people will be surprised to hear this, but um, dietary changes can be really powerful interventions and they can help you in ways that no medicine can very quickly, sometimes within a few days
Hmm.
to a few weeks.
Hmm.
But you have to know which dietary changes are the right ones to make, and they're not the ones we're used to hearing about. So, when people ask me this question about timing, I say 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months.
Hmm.
So the earliest I've seen anybody start to feel dramatically better has been 3 days.
Hmm.
Most people start to turn a corner by after about 3 weeks. And then almost everyone has noticed if they're going to respond, which most people do, if they're going to benefit by 3 months, if they haven't responded in 3 months, then they may not ever
Hmm.
get benefit from this diet, or we may need to make some changes, some adjustments and tweaks to it to see if we can get it to work better.
Gotcha. Now, let me ask you. I kind of think I know the answer to this question. Do you ever watch reality shows?
No.
Okay,
I watch sitcoms, so
that's fair.
I mean, I'm not like a TV snob, but I'm not
Right.
a fan of reality shows.
Yeah. I kind of am the same way. We're watching. I don't know if you ever watched the series. This Is Us, which is something I
I've
watch
seen a
on.
few episodes, yes, uh-huh.
Yes, so well done. And
Yes.
every time I try to watch also show Suits, my wife's like, "Can we watch This Is Us?" So it's really kind of cute. But I bring it up because I didn't realize I was kind of watching a reality show when I was watching one called Love on the Spectrum, which is
Mm,
on Netflix. And what's cool about that show is you have kids on the spectrum who have autism at different levels, but they're trying to find love. And as you know, finding love when you have something like autism is a little bit more challenging. It's challenging enough if you don't have autism.
that's right.
No question about that. And I want to bring that up because when we think about mental health, we think about depression and anxiety and bipolar, schizophrenia, and things of that nature. But I'm not sure we think about autism or ADHD. So, since that is a condition of the mind, I want to hear from you. Is there hope for people who are trying to improve those conditions by making dietary changes as well?
Absolutely. So, first of all, it almost really doesn't matter what the diagnosis is. Um, if you feed your brain properly, it will work better.
Right.
and
Period.
and the studies are starting to show this. So in autism in particular, so I'm not a child psychiatrist. I mean, of course, I've worked with many adults who are on the spectrum, but I don't work with children with autism. But there
Hmm.
have been studies. There are several case reports in the literature and the scientific literature, and there are three small clinical studies of ketogenic diets in children with autism. And one of them was something called a randomized control trial, which is considered a more rigorous kind of study design where the results are considered more reliable and more
Hmm.
important. So there have been three studies in autism, and one was a randomized control trial, but these were all very small, but very promising because in all three of these studies, the ketogenic diet um, uh, allowed a decent number of those children to experience a significant amount of relief from some of their autism symptoms. So, this is a very promising intervention in autism.
Hmm.
And then with ADHD, uh, there have not yet been any uh, clinical trials, any experiments, some human experiments of ketogenic diets for people with ADHD, children or adults. Although there are at least two being planned right now
Mm.
that I will likely be helping with, and so I'm really excited about that because
Hmm.
I see in my patients all the time attention problems improving on a ketogenic diet. And so, people, regardless of what the mental health condition is, whether it's depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, OCD, most people with a mental health issue
Mm-hmm.
also have at least some difficulty with attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because attention problems are so common, that you see that, and so we see attention problems improving in most cases. But the other thing I'll say is that there have been some really wonderful studies of dietary changes in children with ADHD. These were all done, a few decades ago in Europe. Different study groups in Europe. There was this diet called a few foods diet.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a really simple diet with just a few foods in it. And they took out all of the foods that are common culprits for allergies. They
Mm-hmm.
took out almost all the modern processed junk foods. They took out, and this was essentially just a really simple, mostly whole foods diet.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, they're very similar in the different studies. Things like, poultry and vegetables, and they it looked a lot like a paleo diet, except that it included a few things other than meats and vegetables and
Mm-hmm.
fruits. It also included apple juice, white rice, and margarine,
Mm-hmm.
because they couldn't use butter. They didn't want to use butter because butter
Right.
is dairy is a common allergen. So with these so-called few foods diets, that were mostly whole foods diets with meats and fruits and vegetables and a few other things, most of these kids, depending on the study you looked at, it was either 2/3 to 3/4 of these kids
Mm-hmm.
improved. And a lot of them improved so much that they no longer met criteria. They no longer
Wow.
qualified for having ADHD within just a few weeks,
That's insane.
right? So
Yeah.
food makes a big difference in attention problems. We know for sure that it does in kids. And in adults, we're going to do the studies, we're getting them underway, but we see it every day in clinical practice. And
Yeah.
ADHD can be a real challenging thing for people. I mean, there are a lot of people in the world who have attention problems, and it's standing in their way of reaching their full potential.
They just can't do it. I know folk who are still challenged with that. And these are not like, 18-year-olds. These are adults that are 40s and 50s. And sometimes they just don't get the help they need. But because of that, maybe they have to learn some things to get to the next career opportunity, and they just can't do it. And it's just very frustrating for them. They're just as motivated as anybody, and yet they just can't get their brains to function properly. So it's really hopeful to know that you said that literally everything, every condition can get better. So maybe for those who are checking us out today, let's just mention some of the mental health conditions you see in your practice that you've seen get better. I know it's not an all-inclusive list, but what comes to mind?
Yeah, so I'm a general adult psychiatrist, so I see adults with all kinds of conditions, and really anything anybody wants to come to see me about. And so I don't specialize in any one thing. So I see depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD. I see bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, something called mild cognitive impairment, which is the subtle memory problems that can happen on your way to Alzheimer's
Hmm.
disease and other types of dementia. And so, and I really mean it when I say that it makes. I see people with eating disorders, overeating
Hmm.
disorders, and undereating disorders. Right, mostly overeating disorders, um, but uh, but but feeding the brain properly. Whether you go ultimately to a ketogenic level or not, because there are other things you can do to improve your diet that stop short of going into
Hmm.
ketosis, for those who don't want to do that. Um, Changing your diet in these brain healthy ways makes sense no matter what the issue is, and even a ketogenic diet makes sense to consider in almost everyone, in almost every adult. And in my clinician training program, I teach people that there are very few situations where you're going to say that the ketogenic diet should not be considered
Right.
at all.
Yeah.
because it's such a powerful and healthy way
Hmm.
to run your body and your brain, that it makes sense to consider for almost everybody.
Awesome. Maybe a little more about the topic that has touched my home, which is my wife's dad, my father-in-law, and dementia. And well, I kind of think about the facilities that help support patients with this condition, and they're doing their best. They're mostly short-staffed and don't have a clue about anything we're talking about. You get dessert with most meals, so it's not really the kind of food that would be good for this. But I guess when you think about the people you take care of that deal with cognitive decline and or early dementia, can you share an example of what you've seen, like how somebody's really gotten better? What does that look like? If you can give a really good example, just to kind of inspire us.
Yeah, and I include an example in the book of a woman who very generously allows me to use her name and her story in the book,
Cool.
and she's allowed me to use a video of her, speaking to people about her experience when I presenting at conferences. So her
Hmm.
name is Fran. So I've worked with a number of people with dementia and various degrees of dementia, but I share this story because I have her permission to share it, and it's a very
Hmm.
really good example of what's possible. Because when you look at the actual clinical studies, the experiments that have been done with ketogenic diets for people with cognitive decline, the results, I mean, they're not that impressive. You
Hmm.
don't see dramatic improvements, but you can see dramatic improvement in people when you're working with them one on one and giving them specific types of guidance,
Hmm.
and they're really motivated. So Fran, when she was in her 40s, she slipped and fell on the ice, struck her head. She had a concussion, um, developed seizures as a result, mild seizure disorder as a result of this head injury, and was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment in her late 40s as a result of this injury. And so she was a pharmaceutical sales representative, and she was, the kinds of things she was struggling with her memory were things like, she couldn't remember. She couldn't remember driving directions. So if someone said,
Hmm.
"Oh, we're going to meet here today," she'd get lost on the way. Even if she wrote it down, she might have a hard time getting there. She would hunt for hours for her car in parking lots, that sort of thing. And she was really, and she had come to accept that this was,
Yeah.
this was how she was going to live her life. And she was told many times that eventually she'd be at higher risk for actual dementia because of this it's a midlife injury. So that's what she was expecting to happen. But she stayed really stable for a long time. Her cognition, she kind of worked around it and figured out, and she functioned like this for many years. But she did eventually have to leave her job as a pharmaceutical sales representative because she wasn't able to function in that position
Hmm.
given her memory challenges. So then in her 60s, so this is maybe 20 years later, she started to notice a change, more difficulty with word finding. She
Hmm.
started to, struggle more when she was in conversations to maintain her train of thought. And then one day in her mid 60s, she sat down at the sewing machine that her mother had given her and that she'd used almost every day for 50 years and couldn't remember how to thread the machine.
Hmm.
And she thought, okay, this is it. I knew this was coming, but she was terrified. So her son had been working with me using a ketogenic diet for a different reason, and so he asked me to see her and talk to her. I talked with her, and she was really she'd gone to her primary care doctor, and her primary care said, "Yep, this is what this is.
Hmm.
You've got Alzheimer's disease, and I'm going to make you an appointment with a neurologist, but he doesn't have time to see you for another 10 weeks
Hmm.
to just do some testing to confirm that that's the diagnosis." But that's what I'm seeing, and so you just wait for that appointment. And so we talked, and she was very motivated to. At this point, I think she would have tried anything,
Hmm.
um, and to try the diet. And she followed the diet to a T. And within several weeks, she she became noticeably better. Not just the newer symptoms that she had, not only could she thread her machine and finish her
Mm-hmm.
sentences and that sort of thing, but she was able to remember even complicated driving directions without even having to write them down.
Mm-mm-mm.
And she said her memory was better than it had been in a really long time, not just a few. So then by the time she gets to her neurology appointment, her mental health score was 27 out of 28, her memory score. And the neurologist said, well, we can take this diagnosis off your chart. You're
Right.
doing great. And she continues to this day. I think that was 3 or 4 years ago. I touch base with her on occasion, even now. And she stayed on this diet, remained on this diet, still well. She I really think that when you have someone who's motivated
Mm-hmm.
and who has the right information,
Right
that
information.
amazing things are possible. And there's a
That's
beautiful new case report that's been published if people are interested in a really dramatic story of improvement. I can tell you more about that or share a link with people, but um, it is possible. It's never too late.
right.
It's never
Mm.
too late to feed your brain the right way.
Mm. That's very hopeful, especially that it's never too late statement. Um, I just really hope the family members of people who have cognitive decline understand that they play a vital role, and it will be so much easier, just like you were dealing with that fifth grader, if the whole family engaged in that journey with that family member. So if anybody out there is looking for hope and want to do an experiment, a pretty safe experiment, mind you, why not give your family member or yourself an opportunity to start to heal? So it's really so. Thank you for sharing that story. I think telling stories are very, very helpful for people so they can kind of take that walk with you, understand what life was and what it is now. I'm very I called myself the metabolic health doc because I wanted to make up give space for people who have other dietary patterns to know that they're welcome. In fact, my
Yes.
last guest on the podcast, I didn't even ask him what his diet was. I just wanted to come and share his perspective. He ended up being more of a plant-based proponent, but my point is, there are different ways to achieve health, right? But it just seems like for the brain, uh, the higher fat approach seems to be the most effective. So when you have somebody in front of you who, for whatever reason, wants to use a plant-based dietary approach to achieve metabolic health and brain health, how does that conversation go? How do you approach that conversation, knowing that maybe for most of us, the low carb approach is the better approach?
Yeah, I love this question because I tell folks that I am nutritionally pro-choice, and I really want people to feel good about the diet they're eating, and that what they eat is completely up to them.
Mhm,
And I just want them to have. I am pro choice, but I want people to have the right information so that the choices they make are informed choices, right?
mhm,
So that you know what the pros and cons are of the choices you're making. And one of the wonderful things about a ketogenic diet and ketosis is that it's not about how many plants or animals you eat. So you can, whether you're eating an all plant diet, an all animal diet, or anything in between, you can get into ketosis as long as you know what the rules are.
right.
You just have to know what the rules are, and you have to get the carbohydrates down very low. And you can do that. It's more challenging if you're following a vegan diet, which because some of the protein sources are high in carbohydrates,
Mhm,
you have to sort that out. But it can be done. So eat. I mean, a vegetarian ketogenic diet is really easy. It's very easy to construct a very healthy ketogenic vegetarian diet. Because you're going to include some eggs, hopefully, in that
yeah,
plan,
right.
some animal source nutrients, which are really important for optimal brain health. But even if you're following a vegan diet, you can benefit from ketosis. There's no reason why you can't do this. You just have to have the right information to be able to do it. You don't have to eat animals if you don't want to, and to get into ketosis. You will have a more difficult time getting all the nutrients to your brain that it needs, delivering all the nutrients that it needs, because so many of the nutrients that the brain and the rest of the body need are so much easier to obtain from animal foods, much harder to obtain in plant foods, and some are impossible to obtain from plant
Hmm.
foods and require very careful supplementation. But there's no reason why dietary philosophies or preferences should stand in the way of improving the the brain healthiness of your diet. There's lots of different ways
Yeah.
to do it, and I make that clear in the book too. That there are lots of different ways to do this
Hmm.
based on your preferences, your goals, and your current metabolic health.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. And again, we want everybody to benefit from this information. So to meet people where they are is always important. So I'm really happy to hear that. And, as I talk to patients who are, mostly dealing with diabetes, hypertension, and things of those natures, uh, they, we talk about getting the carbs down. We may say, 50 or less. I really kind of lean towards, 30 total or less. However, I know that mental health conditions it's probably better to, stay in ketosis and not go in and out. So my question is, most of my patients don't measure ketones, right? So, but with this type of condition, it seems like that would be more valuable. So how do you deal with the measuring ketones question? And if so, what range do you want them to be in?
I love this question because here again, there are a lot of different options, right? So um, there are some people who don't need to be in ketosis to improve their mental health at all. And so in the book, what I did, because I know a ketogenic diet is a non-starter for some people,
Right.
but I still want those people to know that there are lots of changes they can make to their diet that have nothing to do with ketones that can make can support better brain health. So the first step, I kind of put three plans in that people can explore. The first step is 90 grams of carbohydrate a day, kind of a paleo
Yeah.
style diet,
Yeah.
kind of a special paleo style diet, with 90 grams of carbohydrate a day, which is still about two-thirds less than
Yeah.
most people are eating.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
it's a big reduction in glucose and insulin load
That's
on
right.
the body,
That's right.
right? Takes a
That's right.
lot of the pressure off, takes a lot of that sugary pressure off the system, right? So, and that's step one, and it's a much healthier diet because of the food choices, but also the carbs are much lower. But that means you can have some fruit or starchy vegetable with every meal
That's
if you
right.
want.
That's right.
So it doesn't look so strange. It's not as big an adjustment, and maybe that's all you need to do. Depends on how much metabolic damage you already have.
Right.
And so there's that. But then if that doesn't get you where you're trying to go, then you can start to explore, like you were saying, get the carbs down below 30.
That's right.
So the next plan that I put in the book is a ketogenic paleo plan that contains about 20 grams of carbohydrate per
Yeah.
day,
Yeah.
to see if that is going to be the ticket, right? And then and then you can even go further if you want to and explore carnivore
That's right.
diet, which I know your listeners probably know all about.
That's
So,
right.
so there are these different degrees of experimentation that you can do. And one thing I should say, and I'm sure you probably were going to say this at the end anyway, but that it is really important not to just start a ketogenic diet today without learning more about it and
That's right.
consulting with somebody, because especially if you have certain health conditions or take certain medications, it can be um, dangerous to just kind of plunge yourself onto a
That's
ketogenic
right.
diet
That's right.
under certain circumstances. So you do learn more, but and the reason why, and it's not because the ketogenic diet is dangerous. It's because the ketogenic diet is a powerful metabolic intervention, and it's so powerful that if you combine it with certain medications, it can be dangerous because it's duplicating a lot of what those medicines are doing for you.
That's right.
It's going to help you lower your blood pressure. It's going to bring
Hmm.
your blood sugar down really
That's right.
beautifully. It's going to stabilize your brain chemistry. It's going to help you lose some excess fluid that you've been holding on to.
That's right.
If all those things happen too fast, that's going to be too much of a shock.
It
Very
is.
healthy changes, but they're too fast. And so you need to know how to just navigate that safely and smoothly. So make sure you get some help and some information. The book will tell you a lot of what you need to know, but I still encourage people, even in the book, even if you've read the whole book and think you know a lot, to make sure that you consult with somebody to make sure it's as safe as possible.
Yes, it's critical. I've seen examples of patients who make the change, and they're very motivated, like the example of the patient you shared, and and I was a little shocked, to be honest with you. Patient had was just taking a water pill, not a terribly high dose, and went on a very restricted, hate to use that word, but I mean, it was less than 20 carbs a day, and kind of passed out.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
I mean, and gets to the hospital, and blood pressure's like 90 over, and this person probably 90 over 60. This person had always lived in that 150 range, so
Yep.
I and it didn't take a long time. So, and I always tell patients, carbohydrates has the word hydrate. It attracts water,
Oh,
salt,
nice.
minerals, and things into your body. And when you get rid of carbs, it gets rid of the salt and the water and some of the minerals. And so, at if your body is like shocked by this, it can definitely drop your blood pressure. The good news is you were trying to drop your blood pressure. You just didn't want it to be so sudden. So I think one of the benefits of learning about metabolic health as a clinician is that it kind of teaches you there's some things you have to warn people about. So I think and one of the things, briefly, we may want to touch on this is electrolytes. So if you're getting rid of all of these electrolytes, you sometimes have to replace them. So is it like when I started my journey with carnivore maybe a year or so ago, I really didn't do electrolytes, to be honest, and I only did it more recently because I was having cramps every once in a while. But so my question is it do you automatically talk about electrolytes, or do you tell people you just kind of play it by ear? So how do you deal with the electrolyte issue, which can be an issue with some people doing keto or carnivore?
Yes. And that comes back to your example that you shared about how when you start a ketogenic diet, you can lose some excess fluid and salt.
Yes,
And the body lets go of that excess fluid and salt, which is a very good thing. But if it happens too quickly,
yeah,
you could end up on the floor.
that's
And
right.
so, and I myself had a patient on a diuretic on a water pill on Lasix,
Yeah,
and started to get palpitations and feel lightheaded and dehydrated and all that sort of thing. I thought, oh no, this is we're going to send you to the emergency room.
that's right.
So these aren't. It's not that we just say these things to say that, oh, to cover ourselves legally. These are real
That's
safety
right.
issues, and
That's
you
right.
want safety first, right? So anyway, what do I tell people? Um, I tell people in the beginning to supplement with electrolytes and all that. All I mean by that is salt your food liberally and
That's
sip on
right.
something salty throughout the day. And it could
That's
be
right.
bouillon, it could be your homemade electrolyte beverage, which was really cheap. You can use like
That's right.
Morton's light salt, and I have a
That's right.
recipe in the book. It costs like a penny,
That's
and
right. That's right.
I mean, you can buy the fancy electrolyte supplements online if you want, or at the store. But you don't have to use those.
That's right.
You can just add, olive juice or pickle juice, anything salty, right?
Right.
To help keep those salt levels stable throughout the day, so that you're not going to feel dizzy, you're not going to feel like you can't concentrate, you're not going to feel tired, and because a lot of people do, especially if they go straight from a very high carbohydrate diet to a very low carbohydrate diet. If you do
Hmm.
that too quickly, you're going to have this. It's going to take time for the body to find its new equilibrium in terms
That's
of
right.
its salt balance, right? But I do find that once people are through the transition phase, A lot of them don't need to keep doing that.
That's
They
right.
can let go of the electrolytes if they
That's right.
want to, and they can see if they need them or not,
That's
right?
right.
And people can tell, like because if you're not feeling right and you sip on something salty, within minutes you feel better.
Right. That's right.
I mean, maybe it's some other reason, but if it's the electrolytes, it's going to fix itself really
Yeah. Pretty.
quickly if you take that salty drink. So it's not a big deal. You
Yeah.
know, something salty for the first few weeks at least, and then you see how it goes and whether you
See
need
how
it
you
after
go
that. I have
after.
found that once I transition, I don't need it anymore, but there are some people who feel much better if they continue that plan.
Well, you had me at pickle juice. So
I know it's good, right?
yeah, that's I remember growing up on the west side of Chicago, and you'd always see the girls walking around with pickles. It was like a thing, you know. So I absolutely had a little flashback with that one. So I think I'll wrap up with two questions. One is real quick. And I guess I'll kind of connect that with cognitive decline. You hear about exogenous ketones a lot, and they're kind of popular now. Rather, it's through an MCT oil or something a little fancier, right?
Mhm.
So, your thoughts on the need for something like that, particularly for dementia, and then I'll ask you how you plan to protect your nest over the next 12 months. So maybe we can wrap up with those two.
Yeah. So exogenous ketones. So one of the things I write about in the book and that I teach in my training program for clinicians is that it matters where the ketones come from, right? So you don't.
Hmm.
It's always better if you can to make your ketones yourself from inside your own body.
Hmm.
That's always the best way to do this, because when you do it that way, because of the way you make ketones inside your body is you've got to lower your glucose and insulin levels, and you've got to get those down to a certain point before fat burning will switch on, right? So you've got to do that. Then you switch on fat burning, and then some of that fat turns into ketones. The ketones go into the blood, and they feed your brain and other organs. That's how you do it naturally. Um, if you're trying and if you're hoping to get around the dietary change and just use exogenous ketones like ketone supplements, ketone salts, ketone esters, MCT oil, those kinds of things, if you're hoping not to change your diet and just get into ketosis from outside the body, um, you can sometimes notice some benefits. Some people feel better when they take exogenous ketones, but A, they're expensive. B, they only last maybe 2 hours at most in your system. So you're going to need to take a lot of them. It's going to run you into some cash. And C, those ketones are not going to lower your glucose and insulin levels. So if you keep eating the same way, yes, you'll get some benefits of the ketones crossing into your brain and helping bridge some that energy gap that might have developed from years of metabolic damage. So your brain might work a little better, but underneath that band-aid, the damaging process that's happening from those high glucose and insulin levels is just going to continue to march silently on. So it's really just a band-aid approach. But what you're asking about, because I know you weren't asking about that, because you already know these things, you were asking about is there an additional benefit, especially for people with cognitive decline, to bolster their ketone levels and their brain ketone levels using exogenous ketone supplements like salts and esters and MCT oil. And yes, there can be a benefit, especially if you can combine the diet with the supplements. Then you can use the supplements to increase the level of ketones. Especially if you don't have the resources or the ability, where whatever your living situation is, to change your diet enough to get really nice, robust ketone levels, right? So you can support higher ketone levels using a combination of whatever diet you can manage to do plus supported with that extra boost of outside ketones. So, yes, because the higher the brain ketones are, the more the brain cells will absorb of those ketones and turn them into energy. And the more you can get those brain cells coming back online and kind of humming for you again. So, the ketone level seems to be especially important in people who have a brain energy deficit,
Hmm.
sluggish brain glucose processing. And so people with cognitive decline, by the time they've noticed any memory problems, they can already have lost 25% of their brain's glucose processing capacity. You're going to need to bridge that energy gap, and you can't do it with glucose. You're going to need an alternative fuel source, and that's where the ketones come in. So, yes, generating them from inside the body is fantastic, but you can, if you need an even higher level of ketones for better brain performance, then you can supplement with the exogenous ketones on top of that.
Excellent. That's perfect. And I just wanted to add that little nuance because I think again, there's people are at different stages and different, particularly if you have somebody in a place assisted living or a place where they're not where you can't control the food, then maybe this is an opportunity to do something like that. So that's excellent. So
Yes, and
again, we
and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it reminds me, I was working with a patient for 2.5 years with mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease, and he was in an assisted living facility where all the meals were
Mhm.
prepared by the dining staff.
That's
Right,
right.
he had to eat in the dining hall, and there was only so much he could do,
That's right.
to control the carbohydrates. He did his best, and he did a really amazing job. But still, he used MCT oil to support higher levels of ketones to treat his cognitive issues. And that's a perfect example of what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we're gonna want to continue spreading this message. And since you wrote the book, I want you to be healthy. So, in terms of protecting your nest, right? I know you've been working on yourself for years, just like myself and
Mhm.
others. But any particular areas you're going to focus on a little bit more, other than now, first of all, you're probably doing too much trying to get the message out, right? So I'm going to pray pray for you because I know that's been busy. I can only imagine what that's like. But what else are you going to do to protect your nest over the next 12 months?
Well, to be honest, so I've always done a good job, for the most part. I mean, not perfect, but a good job. I know what to eat, and I know how to eat the right way. So I usually don't have to focus as much on that. What has really slipped for me with all of the work of the book and getting the word out about the book. This is a good problem to have, that that there's been a lot of interest in it, and I'm really grateful for that because I hope it helps people. But I haven't been able to exercise as much.
Right.
And that's really been, especially for me, I'm 59 years old. I don't want to lose muscle. Muscle is a really important pillar of metabolic health and healthy aging. I want to be strong. I want to be resilient. I want to have good, robust, metabolic rate. And I know how important that is. So that's been what I have started to focus on more over the past couple of weeks, is try to get back into those healthy exercise habits, which had fallen away, because I really think that they were the last habit that I learned in my
Mm,
life. And so I think the last one you learn is always the first one to go,
that's right. That's right.
when
That's
you're
right.
under stress or really busy. And so that's going to be my goal for the next couple of months, is to get back into that routine.
Absolutely. It took a while for me to get consistent with exercise, and it's been probably about 3 years. But again, I only exercise a couple of times a week, and we both know Dr. Ben Bokikio, so I kind of
Yep.
use his approach. So it was a good way to start. I may do more in the future, but that's been a winner for me. So appreciate that. I appreciate you. I appreciate all you're doing. Was so excited when I saw the book was coming out, and we'll make sure to share the book in the show notes. Make sure people have access to it. Is it mostly Amazon, or are there other places people can find it?
It's really anywhere you like to buy books, and one of my favorite places to recommend is called bookshop.org,
Hmm.
because they support independent booksellers. But
Nice.
you'll find it anywhere where you like to buy your books.
All right. Well, thank you again,
Or
and
recommend it to your library if you don't want to buy it.
yes, I like that. Yeah, because that's a great idea. So I've learned from my patients, particularly my seniors, they take advantage of the library. So it's been enjoyable. I really just wanted to make sure that you came on a second time because I just think that this message is so important, particularly when you have experienced it. I don't think I fully understood dementia until it came home, right? I mean,
Mm.
until you experience it and you see the impact and you see who this person was and who they are now, and you're just doing the best you can with it, you really understand the value of giving people hope. So I really thank you for doing that. So many people will be touched by your work, and just by sharing this, I think we all just feel better about life, knowing that there's a way, there's another way, there's hope. And I just thank you for that. So continue to do that work. I'll continue to support what you're doing. And also thank you for joining Carrie and the
Oh,
Homestead
yeah.
How crew for the carnivore uh, documentary, Healing Humanity. And that's why we're doing it, because we want not only the message of mental health to get out there, but all the different ways a carb reduced diet can benefit people. So I really thank you for participating in that. And I can't wait for that project to reveal itself in the future. So thank you so much.
I'm really excited about that project, and I really appreciate you connecting me to them, and I appreciate all the good work you do and the way that you're helping people to understand and get
Yeah,
interested and curious
that's
about
right.
what they can do for themselves.
That's
Um, you know, doctors are wonderful, and if you've got Dr. Tony as your doctor, you're lucky. To have him on your team, but your goal, I think your goal should be to take some of that matter into your own hands, get the
right. Yeah,
information you need, and
yeah,
try some changes and get healthier, so that you need your doctors less. And
that's right.
my when I wake up in the morning, I think, how am I going to make myself obsolete?
That's right. That's right. Put you out of business. That's right.
Or put me out of business, right? So now that we'll always need doctors, of course, and but just think more about what you can do for yourself and
That's
get
right.
hopeful and get curious.
That's
These
right.
interventions are powerful. You can do it. If you just have the right information and the right support, you can do it. And thank you really so much, Tony, for everything you do.
No, absolutely.
I love being back on your program, and I'm really looking forward to working more with you.
Absolutely. Appreciate that. And thank you again. And for those who had a chance to enjoy this conversation, understand that there are a ton of people in the world who suffer from mental health conditions. You may know some of those people yourself. And again, today we just wanted to provide a little hope. That's all. So that hope is spread even more if you help to spread that message. So whether you're checking out this episode of the podcast, another interview Dr. Georgia E. did, or sharing her book, I think it's a great gift. I recommend it to my patients all the time. And I just think it's a great way to give them some tools, because when you get excited about something, you got to know what to do next. So, and the messages are all about how we can restore hope of cognitive function. We can restore hope of putting some of our mental health conditions into remission. We can, restore hope, with people with autism. So maybe they can actually find love on the spectrum, as the Netflix reality show is entitled, by simply changing their diet. And I just love the idea that that's a possibility. So let's help spread this message. Imagine the gift of mental health. I mean, can you think about, if you think about what people worry about, they always worry about losing their mind. So if we have a way to
Mm.
avoid that, this is one of those ways. So thank you again for caring about yourself enough to check out this episode of the Protecting Your Nest podcast. And until we meet again, continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.